Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session on writing for publication, part 2 of what we started yesterday. So we're going to be continuing on the various steps of how to write for publication. And we are in the process of assessing potential for publication. So what is it that needs to be in place to ensure that you are successful when you submit your article for publication? Okay, I'm going to share my slides. There we go. I hope everyone can see. So we're just going to continue from where we left off yesterday. So just a quick recap to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I hope that everyone who's here was also there yesterday, so that we are all on the same page. But yeah, so how to select the right journal. We started talking about the importance of ensuring that you select the right journal when you have published or when you have written your article. I spoke about what is it that leads to articles being rejected by the editor, so desk rejection. And this is something that you want to, by all means, avoid as you work on your article. Many papers are rejected simply because they don't fulfill journal requirements. I indicated that sometimes it's just the formatting, the structuring, using the wrong referencing type. So you see, these are technical things and not necessarily the content of your article that may lead to desk rejection. So for me as the editor receiving an article like that, first of all, I'm going to think, oh, okay, so this author did not pay attention to the author guidelines. They did not read the author guidelines, because if they did, they would be knowing that we use APA and not Harvard, or we use Harvard and not Chicago. So you want to try and avoid mistakes such as that, because it's a waste of the editor's time, and it's also a waste of your time as well. So from the get-go, as you prepare your article, please make sure that you write an article that is going to be sent out for review. Right? We spoke about identifying target journals. And as you do this, you also need to be realistic. If you've never published before, ideally you would not go and choose Nature as a journal that you want to publish in. Try and look at journals that there's never a given in terms of whether your article will be accepted or not, but you also increase your chances if you are realistic also in the choices of journals that you go for. All right, make sure that you follow author guidelines. Remember, we want to avoid desk rejection. Okay, so what is the scope of the journal? What is it that it covers? What kind of issues? What kind of topics? What does it cover? What types of papers does it go for? Is your paper in line with what they are going for? The word length as well. Again, you will be desk rejected if you write a paper that is too long. This is something also that we've realized with articles that are emanating from your dissertation or your thesis, because here you are, you've written something that's 120 pages long, or that's 180 pages long, and you want to draw from this and to write an article. And remember, an article is much shorter. And again, the author guidelines will guide you in terms of how long it should be and what the maximum word count is. And you're looking at anything between 4,000 to about 8,000 words. Very rarely, there are journals, but very rarely would you find a journal that allows a paper that is as long as 10,000 words. Okay, so you have very limited space in terms of word count. So make sure that you are very deliberate in terms of what it is that you choose to include and why you are including what you're including in the paper that you're writing. So for example, obviously, your literature review is not going to be longer than your findings or your method section, because we're interested in what it is that you are bringing in. And again, this will also be directed by the type of paper that you're writing. Okay, and then the referencing style, I've also spoken about that. Make sure that you follow the journal's referencing style to the T. Find out where to send your paper. Do you email it directly to the editor, or is there an online submission? Give an example there, Scholar One. Many journals now prefer that you submit your article online. It makes the process easy. Everything is streamlined in that it becomes easy for the paper to be sent out to the reviewers. It saves time also in terms of the process that's involved. As we know, we are now living in the world, and therefore things are done online. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with the online submission processes and all the different documents that you need to submit as part of the submission processes. Again, trying to make sure that you don't waste your time and also waste the editor's time as well. And all this information you'll be able to find if you give yourself time to sit with the author guidelines. Okay. And for some journals, there's also an opportunity for you to be in conversation with the editor. Maybe you've identified a journal and you are not sure whether maybe you should or whether your paper is aligned. You've read the author guidelines, but you're still not sure. You may send an email to the editor and say, this is my topic, this is what I'm writing on. I'm attaching the abstract to give you an idea of what my work is about. I was looking at your journal as a possible home for this paper. Would you kindly have a look at my abstract and let me know whether your journal would consider work that is within the scope, the line of argument that I'm bringing forth. So you can do that, and more often than not, you'll find that editors are quite generous and they'll come back to you and give you feedback. That way you also save your time by not submitting everything beforehand and having it rejected. So the editor can tell you, no, actually find a different home, or yes, this is aligned to our journal, so submit to our journal. And if there isn't an editor that you can submit to, the details of the editor are not easily available. Most of the online submission journals, you'll find that the editor's details might not be that readily available. There's an email address maybe that you can send information to or queries to, but maybe not the direct details of the editor. Or you can send your work, your abstract, to your supervisor. In the case where you are co-supervising or where you are co-authoring with your supervisor, that should be easy. The supervisor is already part of the process anyway. I indicated yesterday that please make sure that you familiarize yourself with the journal that you are targeting by reading some of the articles that have recently been published in that journal. That will assist you very, very much. And you do have access. All right. And then another important thing, when you submit your article, many of the journals, most of the journals that you would submit to would require a cover letter. So please take your time writing a cover letter, because the cover letter, again, it introduces you to the editor and it's almost that personal touch, if you will. It allows you the opportunity outside of the scholarly work, the actual article itself. It gives you the opportunity to speak directly to the editor, indicating and putting your case forward as to why this paper is relevant, why you want to publish it in this journal, and why do you think it is aligned to the readership or the audience of that particular journal. Okay, and I have an example here. And you can go online. You can go online and do a bit of homework, look at a number of sample letters, and then use some of those as inspiration to carve your own cover letter as well. There is no one way or right way of writing a cover letter. So just take a moment to have a look at this cover letter to get a sense of what it is that you need to include in the cover letter that can offer the editor a glimpse of what your work is about. Okay, and as I've indicated, there are many samples that you can find online. Please make sure that you check a few of them, and maybe you find one maybe that resonates with you that you can use as a guide for your own letter when you submit your article. And then still continuing, when you look at the journal that you want to publish in, just as when you do your literature review, we always say, do not go for dated articles, do not go for dated work. If you're writing a paper now in 2023, you're not going to be drawing or looking at literature from 20 years ago or so. If you use dated literature, it has to be there has to be a reason why you're doing that, right? And the same with journals as well. Look at the recent issues of the journal. What are some of the topics, conversations that are taking place that the journal is giving attention to, is giving a platform to? And is your conversation, your work also going to form part of the debates that are currently taking place that particular journal is giving attention to? Okay. And then in terms of the journal lists, I spoke yesterday about the DHET list, which is linked to the accreditation of the journals, and that only the accredited journals would be considered and acknowledged by the institution. So as you're working on your own articles emanating from your research, you need to make sure that you choose a journal that is on the accredited list. So there's been a revised policy, and as I've indicated, journals are always reviewed. There's always new journals that are coming to the fore. And also, journals are not permanently on the list. So there has to be consistency in terms of the work that's published, the quality of the work that's published. And that's why it's important for you to check the journal that you're publishing in, whether they've got latest issues and what the issues are about in terms of what they're covering. Okay, so at the moment, the accredited list that we have that is part of the DHET list has got 6, right? So there's 6 lists that your work would then be focusing on or would be considering in terms of the journals that you would want to choose. And there's the ISI, which is the International Scientific Indexing. So there's a list of journals that would be indexed under the ISI. So these would be your highly ranked journals that have got high impact factors, and they would be under the ISI. And then we have the IBSS, we have the DHET list, direct DHET list, we have Scopus, we have CLO, SA, and then we have the Norwegian list. So these are all just the indexing platforms under which there are lists of journals that would be published under these lists. So you would have a particular journal. So let's say maybe the Journal of Health Sciences. And where does the Journal of Health Sciences fall under? So as you look and you check under the list, you'll find that, oh, okay, it's a Scopus listed journal, as an example, or it's an ISI listed journal. So that's how this works. But all of these would fall under the DHET list. So that spreadsheet that I was talking about, that I encourage you to get a copy of, would have all these different journals. So when you're working yourself, your way through the Excel spreadsheet, you will find that all these different indexes are there, and then you'll just click on an index and see what journals are there. Or, as I said, also, you can just type a keyword, or you can type the name of the journal that you've seen, that you've identified, and you want to make sure that it's accredited. So you can type it there on that Excel spreadsheet, and then it will appear, right? And then you will see also under which indexing list it appears under. So you can go to ISI and then type the name of the journal, and then it will tell you if it's there, or it'll say no matches found. You go to IBSS, the same thing, until you get it. So if you go through all these different lists and that journal name does not appear, then it means that journal is not accredited. Okay, so that's what that means. Then it means you maybe might want to look at a different journal instead. And how do you decide on the journal? Again, just quickly, what is the purpose? What is its purpose? What does it want to achieve? What is its aim? How prestigious is it? Again, we spoke about the impact factor. We spoke about citations. And again, here in terms of these indexing lists as well, you know, if it's under ISI, then it means the reputation is higher, much higher than maybe other lists. So that's how you also determine or look at the prestige as well. And this prestige really carries value in terms of the subsidy as well that we get, because it's also linked to the impact factor. And at the end of the day, it's also about you, but it's also about the university. And at the end, it's about the ranking of the institution in terms of the kind of research that we do, the quality of the research that we do, the impact of the research that we do. You see, so this has got many, many, many layers. And of course, you will choose a journal based on the number of issues a year and whether it's a national or international journal. And most importantly, it has to be refereed. We spoke about hijacked and predatory journals. And this you'll see whether they speak about being refereed or not. So whether it's peer-reviewed and also whether it's blind peer-reviewed. Right? Does it have an editorial board? Legitimate journals have editorial boards because these are people that offer guidance, direction, and contribute also to the success of the journal. Or is it just the editor just working on their own? All right. So all these things also contribute towards how and where a journal gets indexed. Right. So it speaks to the quality issue again that I keep going back to. Okay, so here's an example of author guidelines. I'm hoping that after yesterday's session, some of you were curious enough that you started going to the internet and playing around a little bit and getting a sense of what are we talking about when we're talking about author guidelines? What does it look like? What does it tell you? Some of you who are already working on publications, draft articles, you might also be familiar with this if you've already been thinking about possible journals that you can consider for your articles as well. So here's just one example, one of many, many examples, because each and every journal has got this, should have this. So this is where you get all the information that you need about the journal, right? It tells you that in terms of submission, it should be submitted by email, in this case in MS Word, to the editors, and there are the editors' names and email addresses, so you can communicate directly with them, so you don't have to send it online, no online submission. And then it indicates there that it's peer-reviewed, right? Peer-reviewed submission will be considered in these areas. So it's reports on original research, summaries of useful information on topical issues, specifically in workforce development. So it's very specific in terms of what the focus of the journal is, overviews of research which present practical implications. So there's also issues around practice, also issues around original research, issues around innovative practices or work that's done as they relate to workforce development, but also linked to education and training. So already when you read that, it gives you an idea that, oh, okay, is my work looking at these bullet points, is my work aligned to what this journal wants, right? And then if you think it is, then you consider submitting here. And if maybe you're not really sure, you think maybe it might also, like I said, write an email to the editor and tell them, and then they can guide you, and then you will know whether this is a good fit for you or not. Okay, so that's it in terms of choosing your journal and deciding on the impact and quality, whether it's going to be a national or international. But then it's important to then look at the actual manuscript itself, and that's what we're going to turn to next. Developing your manuscript, walking through your paper. And you will see there are some similarities in terms of the work that you're busy with right now with your thesis and dissertation. But of course, with your thesis and dissertation, you've got a lot of space. You've got a lot of space to be able to write as much as possible, right? For your PhD, you've got 40,000 words that you can write on or more if you want. So think about moving from the 40,000 words to moving to 5,000 words. How does one do that? All right. So the different steps in terms of looking at the outline of your article, but still making sure that you tell your reader a coherent story where there aren't bits and pieces missing in terms of the work that you're doing. Why publish? Again, just a reiteration of what we've already spoken about. This will speak to how your manuscript will be developed. We publish because we want to increase human knowledge, right? We want to contribute to the body of knowledge. We want to contribute in our discipline, but also writing as a form of self-actualization. As you develop your manuscript and you're putting words together, you are telling your reader this story. It's also that process, that journey of finding your voice, finding yourself as a scholar, as a researcher, and also really standing out as a knowledge producer, as someone who produces something that other people can draw from, can learn from, and can reference, right? So writing as a form of all of these things, as a form of self-actualization. And then we publish because, again, we've completed our master's or doctoral degree. It's achieving that completion and saying, I'm done with my master's, I'm done with my PhD, and I want to disseminate the work that I've produced. So I publish because I want to disseminate my work, right? And I'm publishing because I want to share what I've come up with. I want to share these findings. You've come up with something worth sharing, something new, a new discovery, a new way of thinking, theorizing about a particular phenomenon. And you want to promote that work. And you do this through publication. And of course, it's always beautiful to see your name in print. If you've never published an academic paper before, it's just the joys of seeing your name in print. And UNISA, being the university that it is, also, I think, understands the beauty and the joy of seeing your name in print for the first time. So even when it comes to subsidy or incentives for publication, UNISA also rewards people for publishing for the first time, because it really is important to get to that point where you share your work and your work is deemed worthy and good enough that it gets accepted and it gets published. So it really is coming full circle, if you will, that whole process of self-actualization. It's a beautiful thing. You've spent these couple of years working, or you will be spending this couple of years working on your master's and thesis. And so think about the importance of going that next step and publishing your work. I know that now it's a requirement, but still look at it beyond it being a requirement, but something that allows you the opportunity and the space to share the work and to share what you've been busy with for a number of years. Okay, so working through the format of a typical manuscript. There's the abstract, very, very important. That's why we dedicated a whole session to the abstract, because the abstract is very, very important. Now, in these moments where people are so busy, and in these moments where also, unfortunately, knowledge is sometimes not free, it's important for you to have an abstract that draws people to want to read your work. And then the introduction, background, significance of the study, the literature review, methodology, data analysis, and the findings. You have your discussion, study implications, recommendations, conclusions, and references. Does it look familiar? Of course. So if you're already working on your draft chapters, even in your proposal, when you look at this format, it should be looking familiar to you, right? It's something that you know has to go into your dissertation, has to go into your thesis. So you think of that, but thinking of that having to fit into 5,000 words, right? Remember the word limit. These are many, many bullet points. So how do you structure your manuscript in a way that you can still be able to attend to all of these things, but at the same time adhering to the word limit? But adhering to the word limit in a way also that does not compromise the core of what you want to share with your readers. I'm going to jump quickly through this one because, as I said, we've already had a whole session dedicated to writing an abstract. So your abstract is between 100 and 300 words, depending on what the journal requires. Again, the author guidelines will direct you in terms of how long your abstract should be. And then the structure, again, those 300 words or 100 words, you have to be precise, clear, and it has to be interesting. You have to capture your reader for what I've just said right now in terms of people being busy, but also you are competing with many million other articles. So your abstract should draw the attention of your reader. And in your abstract, try and avoid generic statements like the results will be discussed. If you have about 300 words and you say to me the results will be discussed, you're not really telling me much, and I might not really be interested or inclined to want to read your work. Methods are presented. What does that mean? Future research is discussed. So you need to elaborate a little bit on this, right? It's important for us to get a glimpse, a summary, a concise overview of what I can expect as the reader. And I don't know what to expect when you just say to me the results will be discussed, then methods are presented. So try and avoid generic statements. Okay. As I said, imagine that it's all that you have to say. So I may not have the time or resources to read the whole paper. So in your abstract, I need to get a glimpse of the whole story. You start a conversation with me, and maybe the conversation ends there. But at the end of that conversation, I need to have a clear indication and understanding of what your work is about, what it is that you did, and what it is that you aimed to achieve. So that's what the abstract needs to do, right? It's like giving a presentation to someone. When you say like a 3-minute presentation, those quick presentations, there's actually, I think, a competition at the moment on presenting your thesis in 3 minutes. So think of your abstract that way, that you've got this very limited time that you can tell me about your work, and you have to just do a quick pitch, right? Yeah, that's the right word, a pitch. So the abstract is almost as if you're giving a pitch to somebody. And often when people do pitches, it's because maybe they need funding or an investor. So if somebody's going to invest a lot of money in your project, what are the key things that you think they should know that will definitely sell this idea for them to sign that check, right? So think of your abstract that way. So it has to be complete. So cover all the major parts: introduction, the method, what you found, what does this tell us? Be concise, so very focused. Don't go and beat about the bush, just go to the point. Be very clear, right? It must be readable. Again, try as much as possible to avoid jargon. Must be well organized. Make sure that it's cohesive, that it flows smoothly between the parts from the beginning to the end. You're telling a story, you're telling a narrative in 100 to 300 words. So make sure that everything is in place and it follows logically, right? So how do you do that? You describe the general background, the setting in which your research takes place. Why is it important? You describe what the problem is, and how you attended to this problem. And so what did you do or try to address this problem? So here, the method or methodology that you drew from, and how you collected your data. And then what is it that you found? What are your findings, the evaluation? How did you evaluate? How did you analyze the proposed solution and the results that you find? And what do these results mean? Okay. All right. And then again, this is just how to break down those 300 words. What is it that you're thinking about? Always important to think about your readers as you're writing an article, as you're writing the article, as you're writing the abstract. Who are your readers? So if I say, who did you have in mind when you were writing this? You need to say, okay, I was interested in practitioners. I was interested in policymakers. I'm interested in experts in this discipline. I'm interested. So who are the audience? Who are your readers? And when you know who you are writing for, that will also assist you in terms of how to then approach your writing, because you have a particular reader in mind, right? And then the rest is what I've already discussed. It just gives you an idea in terms of how many words you can dedicate to each part. All right. All right, so now structuring your paper. I've said the pitch. If you think about your abstract as a pitch, then you think about the abstract as something that assists you to sell your article, something that someone will read and say, oh, I must read this article, right? But also the abstract is critical for the editors of the journals as well. I've said yesterday that editors are very busy. And therefore, the abstract is their first contact with your paper and can sometimes make the decision at that point whether it is suitable for their journal or not. So if you leave out very critical aspects of your work, then you're also denying yourself the opportunity for your work to get the opportunity to have the potential of being published or of being sent out for review. Readers online, I've said sometimes people have to pay. They may decide not to read further after reading an abstract that's not good enough. Always ensure that you are clear, that you're honest, that you're concise, and that you've covered all the major points. That's what the abstract is about, and that's what it entails. Now, the manuscript, the actual paper now itself. Before you even start writing a paper, you need to be very clear about what it is that you want to write about. You need to be very clear about what kind of paper you're going to be writing. Is it going to be a paper focusing on practice? Is it going to be a case study? Is it going to be a literature review? Is it so? You need to decide that first, because that's going to assist you in how you're going to structure your paper. What is the structure that you're thinking about? Because when you have an outline, this is where I'm going to start. I'm going to give an overview and give a background and highlight what the problem is, and why it's important for us to zoom in and give attention to this. And then I indicate the purpose of giving attention to this issue, the purpose of why this is a problem, right? So you make a statement, you make an argument as to why this is important. And when you've done that, then you can follow with the other parts, saying, how am I then going to give attention to this? What is it that I'm going to do to address this problem that I've identified, that I've mentioned to the reader in my introduction? I've made this argument, and now I need to follow through to make a case for this argument, so that at the end, my reader can see why it was important for us to pay attention to this issue in the first place, right? So then that also then speaks to the flow. It speaks to the flow that 1 leads to 2, 2 leads to 3, 3 leads to 4. So there would be logic as well in terms of your argumentation, in terms of how you are making your case. And your headings, your subheadings, meaningful titles. How do you come up with your headings? Sometimes one of the things that I've seen that I find very beautiful, if you've done an empirical study and then you're working with your data, and you find sometimes that your themes also emanate, or your headings emanate from the actual words of your participants. So if maybe you did a qualitative study, your headings become very creative and poetic and beautiful as they emanate from the data that you've collected. And so from that, you can have very interesting, meaningful, and catchy headings or subheadings for the work that you're doing. So also consider that, read with these things in mind as you're doing the work. Okay. And it makes your paper interesting. It makes your paper enjoyable to read, right? Because as you're writing your paper, be it quantitative, qualitative, based on experimental work, you can write it in a way that really is compelling for the reader, enjoyable for the reader. So as you structure your paper, what is the purpose of the paper? So what is the focus? Why is this important? Again, if you're thinking about what you're busy right now, you're thinking about what is the objective here, or what are my objectives? What is my research question, right? So think about that. So what is the purpose here? And then the purpose will lead you to a statement, your purpose statement, to say, this is what I want to achieve. This is what I want to focus on. So, because then this will speak to the significance of the paper, right? So the what, who, when, how, when. So all these questions will speak to the purpose. So what is, right? What is the significance of the paper? Why is this paper important and original? So I would like you to ask yourself these questions as you're working on your manuscript. And you need to be able to answer these questions for yourself, because as you answer these questions, then it also speaks to whether your work is original or not. Why is it important and original? Who will be interested? Already you hear there, we're already thinking about the reader. We're already thinking about the audience, right? So who's the intended audience? As you're writing, you should already know who your audience is, right? And then what are the implications for practice, if that is your aim? What are further research questions, if any? So as you think about purpose statements, they should be structured with these questions in mind, right? The purpose statement should be central to the article's composition, because what you're going to be writing about, again, we say you write so that you can achieve your objectives. You write with a particular purpose in mind because you want to achieve something, right? It will help you, this statement will help you to develop the structure and provide a focus. what, the why, the who, the what next, that we've just discussed. And then the thesis statement. This is a statement of purpose, right? That does not merely state the coverage. So you don't just state the purpose, but you actually now set out an argument. So the purpose of this paper is to get an understanding of why there continues to be an increase in the divorce rates in South Africa, right? So let's say that's a purpose statement. So that's the purpose of the work. You want to get that, and then after saying that, you say, okay, fine. So what next? So you say, and then you make an argument. You say we need to pay attention to the issue of divorce, because if maybe we have a better understanding, then we can come up with models or mechanisms or put processes in place that can contribute towards the reduction of divorce rates in South Africa, right? So now you're making an argument as to why it's important for us to give attention to this, right? You say, this is the purpose, this is what I want to do, but why do you want to do it? So make an argument for the case that you've put forward. And then you make an argument. I always say, think of a court case. When you are in court, you can put things forward, but you need to argue, make a case as to why this person is guilty or why this person is not guilty. Make a case as to why DACA has to be legalized. Why, right? So you need to make an argument for that. I hope that makes sense. And so you can think about this for your own work as well. And then you build on that to actually then write a paper. All right. A thesis statement, I've already spoken a bit about, is unique from a purpose statement in that it makes a prediction of the study, right? You're saying that if we give attention to this challenge of the divorce rates, we can find a solution. We can come up with models. We'll come up with a strategy to reduce divorce cases, right? So you're predicting that if we do this, right? If we look at the factors that influence something, if we check if there's a correlation between things, then we might be able to get to a point where we understand, where we can bring about change, where things could be done differently, right? So there's that prediction, if you will. You predict because perhaps you have not done the research yet, and you're saying, if you give me funding, if you give me the opportunity to do this research, then there's potential for us to be able to resolve this thing, to get an answer to this question, right? Whether at the end that's going to be the case or not, well, we will not know until we do the work, right? So for now, you can predict. You can just predict, hypothesize on something, make an argument towards something. Whereas a purpose statement, it just provides the reader with your goal, as I said, right? You want to get an understanding as to why there are divorce rates. What is it that's causing the divorce rates? What is it that's happening in our communities? What is it that is happening in our families? And so my goal is that I want to get to understand this, right? I want to know what the factors are that are leading or contributing towards this increase, right? So you don't make any assertions at this stage of what the study may find. I hope that's clear. All right. So obviously, then this would be at the beginning. So we're still thinking and talking about structuring your paper. So the purpose of the paper, if you are presenting at the conference, you would say the purpose of this presentation is to highlight this and that. I want to share this. I want to do that. So here you write your paper in the introduction. You provide us maybe with the statistics that show that there's alarming increase in this. There's a challenge. There's been an increase in the past number of years. That essay shows us this, but also maybe internationally, this is the case. But then when you look at South Africa, there seems to be maybe such a skewed understanding or skewed numbers in how considering people getting married and people getting divorced, and then our society. So all of that, and then say, as a result of this, the purpose here is to do 1, 2, and 3. So this would form part of your introduction. So it belongs to the start of your article. And then it helps you to develop the article structure, right? So you start there, the background, that introduction, that purpose, and then you build on that, right? It gives us, as your reader, the focus as you now work on the flow, as you weave all the different points together and say, does this belong here? Does this maybe belong somewhere else? All right. And then you build on that. As I say here, all subsequent points should be related to the development of this purpose statement. So you're not going to bring something new altogether after you've put forward a particular statement. Okay. And then when creating your own purpose statement, there are a few things that you will want to keep in mind. Clearly define your study as quantitative or qualitative, because this will then immediately assist you to be able to know which direction you're going to go and how to frame your argument as well, right? Are you going to be exploring, trying to get an understanding of something? So we know the way in which you would structure your work if you're doing a qualitative study. And the same, you know how you would structure your work if you're doing a quantitative study. Do you want to look at the factors that influence and what are they? Will you then do a survey that will look at different households, look at what people's understanding of reasons for divorce, issues that are at play? So when you have defined your study as quantitative or qualitative, that then also assists you to be able to move on to what your method or methodology is going to look like, right? As I've just said, you explore or you're comparing, you define how the research will take place, and then you speak about who or what will be researched and also where the research is going to take place. And you will see when you're writing an article, all of these flow from each other, right? So you start with your paper statement, you start with your introduction, and everything flows from there. And then as part of making your argument, you also draw from literature to say, this is what others have given attention to, what they've done in other countries. This is the case. But then when we look at South Africa, this is where we find ourselves. And though it's critical for us, therefore, to do this and that and that. So you'll see there, I've already alluded to you drawing literature into this, right? So you then speak to some of the different factors that need to be given attention or different issues that you would focus on in your literature as well. So here's an example of a purpose statement. The present article describes a qualitative study of the career development of 18 prominent, highly achieving African-American Black and white women in the United States across 8 occupational fields. Our aim in the study was to explore critical influences on the career development of these women, particularly those related to their attainment of professional success. And then this is what you went on to do, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then a thesis statement, then, on the other hand, you may wish to write a paper which develops a particular thesis, right? In which case your statement of purpose will be more a thesis statement. So again, it's at the beginning, think about what kind of paper are you writing, because that will determine the direction and the structure of your paper. you don't merely state coverage, but you also set out an argument, right? It should be precise and focused enough for all the related points that you will be bringing in to be considered in the article itself. So with the thesis statement, you should keep in mind all the points during the writing of an article and understanding that as the work progresses, the writing progress, there can be a change in terms of the way in which you are engaging with the argument that you've put forward. You might then give up on the argument, or you might say, as I've argued, this is the case, right? And again, here's an example for you to kind of think about or see how this looks like. All right. So this is a statement. This is an argument that you're making. Heavily taxing and increasing the price of cigarette is essentially a tax on the poorest in our society. Is that so? Okay, go on. And it doesn't deter them from purchasing. Instead, and I put in brackets, right? You can say, instead, I would argue that the government should target those economically disenfranchised with early education about the dangers of smoking. So you're saying, okay, so the dangers of smoking should be the way to go, and not just increasing the value or what people get charged when they buy cigarettes, right? Because it's not going to necessarily lead to people stopping smoking, and we know this. All those who know people who smoke, we know this. Prices go up and they go up, and there's tax to try and deter people. It never works. So here you're arguing that perhaps we should think differently about the ways in which we can respond to the challenge of smoking, to reduce smoking, right? So instead, we could use the money and educate people about the dangers of smoking. Because if you just increase the price, people might still continue to smoke. But maybe if people understand the dangers of smoking, this assumes that they don't. If they don't understand, they'll continue smoking. But if they do understand, perhaps that may provide a better understanding and a different deterrent in terms of getting people to stop smoking. All right. And then you say, okay, I'm saying this based on 1, 2, and 3, and now this is how you need to build on this argument that you have now made. All right, so because you cannot just put that forward and then say, okay, this is what I'm saying. Let's take what I say and then just give money towards education and let's do this. So that has to be based on something, right? So structuring your paper. When you structure your paper, the introduction is very, very important. What is the importance of the introduction? It provides us as your reader with the context, and it sets out the paper's main aims. So the goal, the purpose statement, right? It tells us why this topic is important. It tells us what it contributes to the body of knowledge. So as I'm saying, think about that example of divorce rates, right? Why is it important? Why should we care about high divorce rates, right? And what would exploring this, what would us getting an understanding, what would us giving attention to this contribute to the body of knowledge? Will we know something different? Will it broaden our knowledge if we give attention to looking at why or the factors that influence the increase in the divorce rates? And then the background to the research, right? So give a bit of background. As I was saying, what are the statistics saying? Where are we right now? Has there been an increase in the past 10 years, the past 5 years, or the past 20 years? Maybe there's been a steady increase. And you're saying perhaps we should give attention to this. So what is the background to this, right? It also speaks to why this is important. You give us the background and say, this is why we need to give attention to this. So this all forms part of your introduction. what the structure of the paper will be, and then you'll say, in this paper, I'm going to be giving attention to 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to follow qualitative research, where people were interviewed, so the structure. So all of this is in your introduction. And then what made you decide to research this topic or write this article, right? And here, sometimes, when we talk about these things, you try to think about it in your head and say, what would this look like? And this is why it's important for you to look at sample articles. Look at a number of articles and try to see this. So look at this as an exercise for yourself, right? But then because we would have had this conversation in the session tonight, you would be having this in your mind. And so you'll be looking for some of these things as you're looking at the sample article, right? So this is the homework that I would like to give you today. When you look at the article that you're reading, does it speak to, can you see, is it clear to you what why the topic that article is focusing on is important? Is it clear to you why this is possibly going to contribute, how it's going to possibly contribute, or how it's possibly contributing to the body of knowledge? Has the author given background, right? And from the introduction, do you already get a lay of the land, like a layout of the whole paper from that introduction? So this is an exercise that I would like to give you. We're still going to have another session, and I hope in that session you would already have had this practice and done this for yourself. I think it's only in the doing that some of these things will make more sense to you, right? And you'll see also as I'm talking about this, it's very much also similar to what you're currently busy with right now. And I hope that as we're going through these different sections, you will understand that it's not only for the manuscript, the article that you're going to be writing, but I would like you to also draw on this as you're working on your own thesis as well. Understanding that for your thesis, of course, it's going to be much broader in terms of what you're writing. You'll have more space. Here we're talking the introduction. You have about a page to do all of this. So why this is important, why it contributes, the background, the structure, what made you decide, all of this you're going to do in about a page and a half. Remember, you only have 5,000 words, right? Which is different in your thesis where your introduction can be 10 or 20 pages even. So there you really have the space and opportunity to engage why the topic is important, to give background, to really elaborate, right? But you don't have that luxury when you're working on an article. You have about a page or so, right? And then we'll still speak about the structure of the manuscript in terms of how many words or how many pages can you dedicate to each and every part of the manuscript. We will still get to that, if not tonight, in the future session that we're still going to have. All right. How long should your introduction be? I've just spoken to that. The introduction should be long enough to develop the purpose statement and set out the background to the topic. And again, you're going to be directed by the word count. It should not overwhelm or be out of proportion to the rest of the paper, right? Remember, you don't want to give a lot of background. I can go read for myself what the history is in terms of divorce rates in the world or divorce rates in South Africa, right? I can go and read literature for myself on that. So you have very limited space. So make sure that you use that space widely. It's still important for you to offer that background, but be very concise and very clever about how you choose what you want to foreground and how that is going to assist you in terms of the argument that you are making. So here again, there's lots of literature, but then what is it that you're going to draw from to assist you to be able to support the argument that you're making? And when should the introduction be written? This continues to be an ongoing conversation, I must say. There's different schools of thoughts But often it's suggested that you should write the introduction first. But after you've written the introduction, you write everything else. But when you've written everything else, you might want to visit the introduction. Always revisit as you write, because you'll see how things unfold as you write. And if you go back to that first point there, the structure of the paper, right? We're saying what the structure of the paper will be. So as you work on the paper, you might find that maybe the structure ends up not being exactly as you had anticipated when you started writing the paper. So you will obviously then go back to rewrite or revise what you had said about what the structure of the paper is going to be. Okay, so it's an ongoing process. So you write it knowing that you're still going to revisit it. And the same with your thesis and dissertation right now. You write your chapter 1, but when you have written all the other chapters, you still go back to chapter 1, you revisit it, now telling us what it is that you've done, but also looking at whether there is a flow in terms of what you said in your introduction and then throughout all the different chapters of your thesis. All right, I've indicated already that there's a school of thought which says that the introduction should be written last, along with the conclusion, because the two have to speak to each other. So you start with an argument. And remember, I said sometimes you might revisit that argument at the end and saying, oh, okay, I had said this, I had argued this, but then it turns out that maybe the argument does not hold, right? And that's what we call scholarship. We call learning and being open to seeing what the research or where the research takes you, right? So there are those who say that the introduction should be written last, and those that say it should be written first. But always understanding that the introduction and the conclusion are cousins, right? Or siblings. So one has to speak to the other. So when you write your conclusion, you always revisit the introductions. This is what I said. And then this is how I'm concluding, right? So they have to speak to each other. There's this saying that I need to read your introduction and your conclusion and be able to be okay without reading the rest of the paper. So if I can read your introduction and your conclusion and at the end feel confused or not know what's going on, then there's no point in me reading the whole thing. And sometimes some examiners do that. But of course, they would read the whole work, but they would start with the introduction and the conclusion to already get a sense of your work. And if they're not okay, then already they have an idea of some of the possible challenges with the work, right? It assists them. And some reviewers also do the same, right? However, the purpose statement should be the kernel of the work and should be written first, right? Remember we said that the purpose statement foregrounds, it tells us what the goal is. So that is very critical. It doesn't change because you cannot change the goal. You can indicate why maybe the goal was not met or why there were challenges or how you've met the goal, just like with your objectives in your research, that your research objectives guide you. And as you do the data collection, as you analyze, you do that with your objectives in mind. So here again, with the purpose statement, same, right? It's useful to set out the context of the article. So it's really the core of the introduction of your paper. So you can look at your introduction as work in progress, but the purpose is very important because it gives you direction. If you don't have a purpose, you become directionless because where are you going, right? So the purpose is something that's very important. it's probably wise to write the introduction first, because the introduction sets out your stall, as it were, and then you can revisit it as you write, as I've already indicated. Okay. And then the body of the paper. The body of the paper. There's the literature review, very important. Very important, because you need to know what's already been said. You need to know what's already been done. Because failing to do so, you might run the risk of repeating what's already been done, what's already been said. You have questions and you have curiosity, and you might want to find what the gap is or what the gaps are. And literature is very critical in assisting you to find these gaps. Literature is also very important because it assists you also even in formulating the question. You might have ideas and be curious about something and have some questions, but then after reading the question, you can actually say, oh, based on this literature, then, this is how I would like to frame the work that I'm going to do, because this is what's missing. Right. And then the body of the paper, this is now working with an idea that you're going to be working on an article that's focusing on an empirical study, right? So you're doing empirical work or empirical research. The research methodology or approach is also very important, right? So what is the research methodology and the approach that you use? How did you go and collect the data? And then what are the findings? So this is the body of the paper. And this is where the bulk of your word count will go, because this is where you're saying, this is how I'm doing this work. This is how I've gone and done the work, and I've analyzed, and this is what it's telling me. This is how I'm going to build this theory that I'm coming up with, or it's the basis of this theory, or the basis of this model that I'm suggesting, or the basis of the policy implications that I'm now speaking about, right? So the body of the paper is where the bulk of your word count is going to go. And literature review. It's important to remember that an article is not the same as a dissertation. Okay, very important. You should not cite all possible references on the topic, but only those that are relevant to your research or approach. The literature review is not exhaustive. It's part of the setting of the context. So it assists you to set the context. Literature abound, around the issue of divorce. In the past 10 years, there's been an increase in the divorce, as has been indicated by so and so and so and so. And even globally, we see that this and blah, 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 blah. And therefore, it's critical for us to really give or pay a closer look to this and looking at it in this way. So it assists you to set the context, to say why this is important, to say what has been happening, and as a result of what's been happening, how do we then enter this conversation, and why it's important for me to do this work. So it's really there to just assist you to set the context. And as a result, you have to be very, very choosy, for lack of a better word, in the references that you draw from. Quote those papers from which your own research follows. Remember, you're going to be writing these papers starting from, drawing from your dissertation, but also make sure that based on the research that you're doing, sticking with this example of the divorce within the South African context, African context. So quote for papers from which your own research follows. How is this literature engaging, speaking to, assisting you to make sense of what it is that you're writing about? Make it clear what the position was prior to your own paper. So a lot of work has been focusing on divorce issues, and this is what they've been doing. This is what they've been saying. This is how they've been approaching it. This is where the issue is. These are the kinds of conversations that have been taking place. And therefore, I join this conversation at this point to do this. So what is the position that is currently there that you are now joining in, right? So how does your paper add to all of this? How does your paper add to the conversation that's already taken place? Or how does it add to, or add voice to the silence that maybe exists in the conversation? There is a conversation, but there's also a silence around a particular aspect of this issue. And therefore, your paper adds to that. All right. And as I've already indicated, make sure that you don't use dated references. Make sure that your citations are up to date, especially if we're going to be using the example of divorce. If you're going to go back to 50 years ago, I'm not sure how it's going to assist you, unless if you, again, maybe doing a particular study that looks at the time frame, like a longitudinal type of thing, to say, over the 5 decades, this is where we've been. So and so's paper 50 years ago states this. And when we look over time, there's been a fluctuation, or there's been an increase, or there was a point where actually there wasn't an issue. And now, again, there seems to be a shift. So be very deliberate in the citations that you use. Right? So you don't cite a paper just because it was published in 2022 and you say, no, it's a recent paper. Does it add anything to the argument that you're making? All right. And of course, we know the issue around plagiarism. Every time when you are referencing somebody's work, of course, you have to acknowledge the work. All right. All right. And then when it comes to the research methodology or approach, these are things that you are or should be aware of right now, but I'm zooming in onto them specifically for the purpose of assisting you to think about how do you frame them in the context of writing an article as opposed to writing your dissertation. Because I think for many of the students, this is where they get stuck, to say, how do I now shift from writing about research methodology within my dissertation to writing research methodology in a journal article? And again, I repeat, go to sample articles, look at how they've approached it, look at what they focused on. So you're not going to give us background of qualitative research is this kind of research that does this, its advantages are this and that and that. And there's different, so-and-so says qualitative is like this, and this is what. No, you just go into it, okay? You don't have space and time. So you really go into it. You indicate immediately what the main method is used. So following a qualitative study, this study did this and then did that and did that. So you're not going to give us a whole background. That for us to know that you understand what qualitative research is and what the approaches are and the research design, that's okay there in your dissertation or thesis. Here, we need you to indicate what the methods are, speak about them, and then speak about how you've applied them, right? Demonstrate that the methodology is robust because it's going to assist you to be able to get an in-depth understanding of this and that and the other, or because you want to compare, this is why you're drawing from this methodology, because it will assist you to do 1, 2, and 3, all right? And this is also relevant because for the purpose of my wanting to understand this or to explore this, to be able to get an understanding of this phenomena, that's why I'm doing this, right? So already it speaks to your objective, because in your objective, you said you want to explore, you want to understand this. So this method assists you to do that. Paragraph, that's it. Let's move on, right? Tell the specifics, don't go broad, right? Focus on telling the main story, stating the main stages of your research, the methods that you used, the influences that determined your approach, because I want to understand, because I want to explore, because I want to understand the factors, or explore the factors, or because I want to investigate something, right? So why you chose that particular sample as well. So who are you going to be looking at? Who are you just going to go to the general population, people who've been married, never been married? Why is that important? So you focused on these people because 1, 2, 3, right? Why you chose that particular sample. Additional detail can be given in appendices. You're not going to go about and go all the way now explaining everything as you did in the 20 pages when you had a chapter to write just focusing on research methodology. Here, you don't have a whole chapter dedicated to research methodology, right? That whole chapter of research methodology, it's the whole article. So you need to decide what it is that you're going to draw from for the particular work that you're doing, right? The findings. What are the significant facts? What are the significant points, critical issues that you want to draw from? As I said, again, in your research, there might be a lot of data, right? So again, going back to the purpose, going back to the focus, what it is that you're specifically focusing on this article, that will also come down to also the findings that you're going to privilege in the article, okay? The narrative that you give us. As with the methodology, focus on the essentials, right? The main facts and those with wider significance, rather than giving great detail on every statistic in your results, right? You don't have to give us the whole statistics and the whole everything. So what has got wider significance? Maybe you find a lot of things that are significant, right? But what is the one that's got the wider significance that can actually maybe in some way incorporate the other factors, right? Tell the main story. What are the significant facts that emerge here? Your section on results may well include one on discussion of the significance of the findings. So all of those together. All right. All right. And then structuring your paper. Writing the conclusion. Okay. And I think I will stop with this one, and then we can have time for engagements. Okay, so writing the conclusion, the do's and the don'ts, summarize and conclude. So again, just the overview and conclude. And then you restate the main argument. So again, revisiting your introduction, to remind us that this is what this was about. This was the argument that you're making. And then present key conclusions and recommendations, right? Again, think about your final chapter in your dissertation, but again, just all put together. Say to what extent your original questions have been answered, right? State how your findings, new framework, etc., apply to theory and to the world of practice. In what way? So what is it now that you want us to take from this? State the limitations of your research, state what the implications for further research are, okay? Don't introduce new things at the end, because it's going to confuse us as the readers. Remember, again, your conclusion needs to speak to your introduction. So if it's not there in your introduction, if it was not there when you made your argument at the beginning, don't bring it at the end. In what way is it related? Don't make obvious statements. You don't have space for that, right? And don't contradict things that you said earlier, right? Bring everything together, but make sure that you don't contradict yourself. Okay, and I thought I could just give an example of a conclusion, just quickly. As addressed in my analysis of recent research, the advantages of a later starting time for high school students significantly outweigh the disadvantages. A later starting time would allow teens more time to sleep, something that is important for their physical and mental health, and ultimately improve their academic performance and behavior. The added transportation costs that result from this change can be absorbed through energy savings. The beneficial effects on the student's academic performance and behavior validate this decision, right? So now you're making a statement also for the argument, because you had made an argument at the beginning that later starting time would be more beneficial and it will contribute in these ways. And then you conducted the research, you did the work, and then you found your conclusions, and then you say, based on what I said at the beginning, therefore, right? This is what I'm concluding. I would encourage an in-depth look. Now, this is also forward-looking. I would encourage an in-depth look at the reactions of students to such a change. So should this change be made over time, let's follow up and then see and check whether there's been a change and whether we can monitor and look at it differently, or if it works, maybe it's something that could be applied in other places as well. This sort of study would help determine the actual effects of a later start time on the time management and sleep habits of students. You see, conclusion, voila, speaks directly. Sorry, I didn't have the same introduction example, because then you would be able to see the two and how they speak to each other. All right, but just focusing on the conclusion, this is how you would want to think about it. And in an article, when you're writing an article, this paragraph right here, this is what you should be thinking about when you're thinking about your conclusion. At the most, you would have 2 paragraphs, but where you maybe, again, go back to your purpose statement and all that, and then you say, this is what the study has found, and then this is how I think about as looking at the possibility of what this means and how we can look forward or look ahead, right? So it's got policy implications, because there are policies in schools, obviously, about when schools should start. We have those in South Africa. So if we were to say the schools should start at 9:30, then that would involve the Department of Basic Education, and things have to be rewritten, updated, changed. So it does have policy implications. So there's layers to the findings in terms of the implications of the study and its findings. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here for today, and then open up for engagement. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then come back to you. Okay. It's just going to take a couple of minutes for me to see the questions, if there are any. Let's see. Hey, Idris, hello. Is it a compulsory, or is it compulsory to attach the cover letter when an article to be published is sent to the editors? It depends on the journal. So some journals have the cover letter as a requirement. So you will see that for many of the online, actually all of the online submissions that I'm aware of, for the journals that I'm aware of, it is a requirement that you attach a cover letter. And the cover letter also, as I said, it offers that overview of what your work is about, so that the editor can immediately get a sense of the work that you're doing, or what the article is about. So it's not. I gave an example of author guidelines, where they ask that you submit your article in an MS Word document, and then you email it to the editors. Usually with those kinds of submissions, you don't have to submit a cover letter. So you just submit an article as is. Unless if they specifically indicate that you should. So they would say, when you submit your article, make sure that you include 1, 2, and 3. So maybe you also have supplementary materials, because many of the journals, if maybe your article has got graphs or images, they would say that you should have that as a separate as separate documents. So they would be called supplementary documents. So they will indicate that submit the article and then submit the supporting or supplementary documents, and submit the cover letter to the editor as well. But if it's not clearly stated like that, for journals that ask that you submit by email, then it means it's not compulsory. So it's not for all the journals that the cover letter is compulsory. I guess that's the easy question to that. Be directed by the journal. And if you are unsure, when you've identified a journal and you are unsure, contact the editor and ask. But usually it's there and it's indicated whether you should submit it or not. But it's not compulsory for all journals. No, it's not compulsory. Okay. Okay, hi, Cordial. The issue of format or style of writing is a concern in my country, Ghana. While some assessors of articles for promotion in academia prefer fusion of the literature into the introduction, others prefer otherwise. This affects their perceptions of the quality of your article. How can this issue be addressed? You know what, Kodra? I think be directed by the journal. Because you're saying that this is a concern in Ghana, but I also don't think when you choose a journal, you're going to be choosing a journal necessarily only based in Ghana. So, because the issue of whether to incorporate the literature as part of the introduction or to have the literature review as a separate section in the article is usually also determined by the journal itself. And this is where it becomes important for you to familiarize yourself with the journal that you are choosing. Check the journal that you are choosing, read a number of articles published by that journal, and then see whether those articles have incorporated literature into the introduction or they have a separate literature section. So that should be your guide. Because I'm not sure when you're saying the style of writing is a concern in the country in terms of the journals that are housed within Ghana, or whether it's the institutions that maybe you might also be related or affiliated with in Ghana. So I would suggest that you rather allow yourself to be guided by the choice of journal. So as a UNISA student, of course, you're going to have a broad variety. You're going to be looking at the journals that are listed in the DHEAD list, at least for the articles that you're going to be writing that are going to be emanating from either your master's or your PhD. I'm not sure which one you're busy with, but emanating from your work, those would need to be journals that are in the DHEAD list. And some of the journals in the DHEAD list are actually published by publishing houses in Ghana. I think I know a few, and quite a number also in Nigeria. So it's not only in South Africa or sometimes when we think international, we tend to think outside of the continent, but Ghana is also international. Tanzania is international. Zambia is international. So there are journals that are accredited, that are in the list, that are actually published or housed in countries such as Ghana. Okay, I have a number of students actually that are based in Ghana, and as they work on their publications, they also have to adhere to the DHEAD list, and the DHEAD list will then guide you. So I think for your peace of mind, particularly for the article or articles that you're going to be writing for UNISA, be guided by the DHEAD list and be guided by the choice of journal that you're going to go for. Look at the sample articles, look at their latest issues, look at least 3 to 5 articles, because sometimes the articles are written differently, but look at a number of articles and then let that offer you a peace of mind in terms of guiding you in how you can structure your own article as well. Okay. You continue to say that some assessors will tell you that you have so many headings whilst it was a requirement of the journal. I'm in the area of psychology of education. Okay. I'm not sure what you mean by assessors. Are you talking about reviewers? Are you talking about journal reviewers? Because ideally, the reviewers that are in the database of the journal, or the reviewers that the editors would consult to review your paper, would be people who are familiar with the journal. I'd be worried if a reviewer just receives a paper. It does happen. It does happen. I've received requests from journals that I'm not familiar with, but one of the first things that I do is to then go to the journal website and get an understanding of the requirements of the journal, but also the editor would also communicate this as well. So when you get that request to review, you're also given information about what it is that they're looking for, what is it that the journal focuses on, and usually they would contact you because you're an expert in that field. So you might not necessarily be someone who's familiar or aligned to that journal, but maybe an expert in the field of the topic that the person is written on. So it's also on you as the reviewer to familiarize yourself. And so it could be two things. It could be a reviewer or assessor who might not have familiarized themselves with the journal requirement, and that could be an issue. Yeah, otherwise I don't understand why a reviewer would go against what the journal requires, because you're saying a reviewer says you have too many headings whilst it's the requirement of the journal. So for example, you have your introduction where you've incorporated the literature, or you have the introduction and then you have the literature, which means it's two different headings. Already it's adding up in terms of the number of headings that you're going to have. And then this reviewer doesn't like that very much. But if it's the requirement of the journal, because some journals are very specific in saying you must have the introduction, literature, methods, findings, discussion, conclusion. Some journals are very specific like that. So if you are writing to a journal like that, and then a reviewer tells you, no, you have too many headings, obviously there is miscommunication and a misunderstanding there. But that's okay, because remember, as an author, you also have the right to have your voice. You also have the right to have your voice heard, and you also have the right to actually reject or speak back to what the reviewer is saying. So you don't have to agree with everything that the reviewer said. So in this case, it's very easy. You can write back to the editor and say that this is the feedback that you got. These are the issues that were raised. You've attended to issue 1, 2, 3, but issue 4 says you've got too many headings. But if they look at your article, they will see that the headings that you have are aligned to the requirement of the journal, and therefore you did not make any changes as it relates to the headings that you had in the first instance. Okay, so that would be an issue around structure, and it's something that ideally should be easily resolved, and it's a conversation that you can have with the journal editor. Okay, I hope that works out. Fertel, okay, what is your personal philosophy about publishing a paper? Okay, my personal philosophy is the following, and thank you for sharing your personal philosophy. Small, or start small and go big. Start by publishing locally and then later publish international, specifically in high impact journals. Fertil, I could not agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. It depends on the field that you're in as well, and familiarizing yourself with the journals in your field. But in your philosophy, there is an assumption that you're making, and that assumption, and tell me if I'm wrong, that assumption is that by starting to publish locally, you are publishing in probably not so high impact journals. And one does not necessarily equate to the other, right? I think sometimes we make assumptions that when we're publishing locally, and here I'm going to limit it to South Africa. Kojo is in Ghana, so locally would be Ghana for him or her, for him. And for us in South Africa, for example, local would mean some of the publishing houses or publications that are published by the different publishers here at home. But here's what I would like to say. There are many, many, many high impact journals in South Africa. Okay, maybe not many, many, many. There are many high impact journals in South Africa. One of the journals in my discipline is actually ranked as one of the highest ranked journals in psychology, and it's based here in South Africa. So the idea of local does not necessarily go hand in hand with the idea of impact, right? And I think sometimes we make that assumption that maybe high impact means international. And again, another problematic, which I really want us to think seriously about, is that when we're thinking international, we're thinking about outside of Africa. And this is something that I want us to really be conscious about as well. That when you are in Ghana, when you're thinking international, you can think about South Africa. When you're in South Africa, when you're thinking international, you think about any country that is outside of South Africa. But I don't blame all of us, because even how things are structured within our institutions, this is often how things are looked at. It's an ongoing journey. But Fertel, what I would say is that I agree. My personal philosophy is also starting small and going big. I think that also helps, because it assists you to not feel overwhelmed, especially when you're still emerging, when you're still entering into a field that you might not be familiar with, right? If I can give my own personal example, the first journal article that I published was actually, coincidentally, it was not the choice to say I'm looking at local or international. I was looking at a journal that is aligned to the work that I'm doing. And as I read the different author guidelines from different journals, I felt that that journal speaks to the work that I'm writing about, and that I think it will make a good home for the work that I was writing. And so I submitted, and it was based on my master's work. I submitted to that journal. And luckily, I got a very kind and patient editor who then assisted developmentally in terms of the article eventually being published. Of course, that may not be the case with all the other journals. As we said, many editors are very busy, and it's gotten worse with time. But I got to have the paper published in an internationally recognized journal with a very good impact. But that was solely because of the focus of the work and the audience that I wanted. So I'm often guided by what the focus of the journal is. So you might look at a number of journals, look at 5 journals in your field that might be related to your work. Be guided by what it is that it offers, but also read their rejection rate as well. And that's when the idea of starting small becomes very useful, because if it's a journal that has got a high rejection rate, then it also speaks to the kind of attention that they give and who they would often privilege when it comes to giving attention, when it comes to publishing, and it would be your more established researchers. And then that automatically for me would be, okay, maybe let me put this journal aside. Let me move to the next one. So really spend time, get to know the journal, but always thinking about your audience and whom it is that you're writing this paper for. And start small. Like I said earlier, you're not going to write a paper now and then say, okay, I want to be that person that just breaks barriers or breaks the ceiling immediately. I'm going to send my paper to Nature, don't do that. Don't do that. Start small. That's also my philosophy as well. And then you build from there. And you'll find that as time goes, it's actually journals that invite you to submit your paper to them. Okay. So with time, you get to that point where it gets to them inviting you to submit a paper to their journal. Okay. But one step at a time, starting small. Absolutely agree with you. And your philosophy is very much aligned to mine. Okay. Hi, Mpo. In the narrative, is it expected that one should make reference to the literature? Mpo, what do you mean by in the narrative? So think about the work that you're doing right now. I'm not sure whether you're still busy with your proposal or the actual dissertation or thesis, but in each and every part of the work that you're doing, there's going to be literature in your introduction, right? Literature reviewer goes without saying. There's going to be literature in your methodology section, right? There's going to be literature that forms part of your findings, right? So, and at every part of this, so each and every section is a narrative. It's a story that you're telling, right? But let's call it a scientific story. So it's a story that you're telling. So for each and every part, there has to be literature backing there has to be literature that you're drawing from. There has to be literature that you're in conversation with to make particular points, which is very different from just that section or that part where you just engaging with the literature. So as you're writing your methodology, you're also going to be speaking to literature. In your analysis findings, this is in line with so-and-so, it's aligned to so, or these findings are, adding to what so-and-so said. So literature is really literature review, or the drawing from literature, is a thread that runs through your whole paper. I hope that answers you. Okay. Okay, Koja, should the nature of the article, whether the article is empirical or whether it's a critical literature review, influence the format to use? Yes, definitely. It will influence the format that you're going to use. If you're writing a critical literature review paper, it's going to look very different from when you're reporting on research that you've done. So when you're drawing from literature or secondary data, think about if maybe you're drawing from the archives and doing the work, or colleagues who are maybe in history, for example, and the kind of work that they would do, or our colleagues in literature or English studies, and the kind of work that they would do. Sometimes it's the kind of empirical work where they would engage and collect data on a particular issue, or interview a scholar and then do an analysis. Sometimes it's just really analyzing a book, right? Analyzing a book. So there, obviously, you're not going to be talking about the method. You're not going to talk about how you collected your data. You're not going to talk about findings. So the structure is going to be very different. Okay, the structure will be different. And again, if you are looking at the possibility of writing a critical literature review paper, look at some samples of critical review papers and look at how they're structured. And that should give you an idea of some of the possible ways in which you could do that. I think with empirical research, where the format is very clear and known to all of us and very similar to what you're doing now, it becomes a bit easier to kind of think about the structure. But with the critical literature review, for example, it might not be as easy. I actually like critical review papers because it gives you the freedom in terms of how to write and how to make your argument and make the story flow. It's very beautiful. I think if you're more creative and artistic and creative writer, it's nicer to write those kinds of papers. So there are different styles and different ways in which papers would be structured depending on the focus of your paper. All right. And again, look at the journal and look at what the journal requires. Some journals have a combination of these things, where there could be a case study, where there could be an empirical research paper, and then somebody has done a review of something, or a response to a paper that somebody else has written. And so the format would be different. And you might find that you find all of this in the same journal. Sometimes you find all of this in the same issue of a journal. So just familiarize yourself with the journal. And sometimes you'll find that even within the same journal, there are different structures in terms of how one would approach a particular article. So know first what kind of article that you want to write. Okay. Hello, Lefa. How does one become a reviewer? Okay. Ideally, you should be someone who is in the academic space. Some journals are very strict in terms of wanting reviewers who've got some experience with publishing themselves, people who already have publications, somewhat of an established scholar. But there are some journals that are very open and developmental, because again, we understand that you don't just get to a particular level without some experience. So there's a number of journals that I'm aware of where they also open up the opportunity to graduate students. So if you're maybe still busy with your master's or your PhD, you can be a reviewer under maybe the guidance of somebody else. So maybe your supervisor is asked to review a paper by a journal, and then under your supervisor's guidance, you can be the reviewer of that paper. So I would receive an invite from a journal saying, "Dear Professor Khalo, how are you? We have a paper in your field of research that we would like you to review. We understand that sometimes scholars are very busy. Should you maybe want to have one of your students to review this, or to guide your students in reviewing, please let us know you're open to do that. And then we will acknowledge your student as a reviewer, and their name will appear as one of the reviewers, because some journals at the end of the year, they offer a thank you list, if you will, of all their reviewers for that year. So your name would also then appear. Otherwise, one of the other ways, if you think that you would like to be a reviewer, you are ready to be a reviewer, you can just go to the journal website. So identify a journal in your field, go to the journal website and register yourself as a reviewer. As simple as that. So you go to the website, and then you'll see, in terms of online submission, that you can register as an author. That's if you are intending to submit a paper. Or you can register as a reviewer, and that way you can be added to the journal's reviewer database. So many journals have got a database, and sometimes as an editor, I would look through the database and see that, okay, I don't see anyone that could be a fit to review this paper, but I know other colleagues maybe who might be a fit to review this paper. So I could add the colleagues' details if I know them, or I can send them an email separately, or I can just add their details. They will just get an email saying you've been added to the what journal as a reviewer. And then a review request will come soon, or just a notification that you've been added. And then when there's a review request in future, you'll be considered for it. So Lefa, please, I would like to encourage you to go to the journal website, the journal that you've identified that you think you can be a reviewer for, and see if maybe there's an option for you to register there as a reviewer. Otherwise, if you have identified a journal, but there is no option on their website for you to register as a reviewer, I would encourage you to write to the editor and indicate to the editor that you are currently completing your studies, master's or PhD, and you're interested in getting some experience as a reviewer, and you would like to be added to their database if that is possible. And then they will respond to you and let you know whether that is going to be possible or not. Okay, but also please have a conversation with your supervisor. Tell them that you are interested in becoming a reviewer. And if there are avenues that they can assist you to be able to achieve that goal. Lefa, what are your thoughts about the dreaded reviewer number 2, who is always very critical, overly critical? It has come to be expected that reviewer 2 must be scathing. Okay, Lefa, let me just bring you into the back end of what we do. So we send out the paper to 2 or 3 people and ask them to review the paper. And then the paper comes back with reviews from the people. And then we look at the reviews, we hear what they're saying, and we hire, we we put them as reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 and sometimes reviewer 3 if you're lucky, because it's always good to get more feedback. We put them in that order for your benefit, because nobody wants to read something that is scathing first, right? Because if we start with reviewer 1 as being that reviewer, are you really going to get to reviewer 2, or how are you going to be feeling by the time you get to reviewer 2? So even if reviewer 2 is saying beautiful, wonderful things, you already received this not so beautiful, wonderful things, and so you might not appreciate the beautiful, positive things that reviewer 2 says. So we would like you to read the beautiful stuff first. Also as a way to say, actually, your work has potential. Here's somebody who sees potential in this work and they've seen these positive things in this work. They might have raised 1 or 2 things, but here's what they say. But number 2 has found more critical things that maybe need further attention and more working. So those are my thoughts around that. Reviewer 2 is always that person, because we would like you to get positive news first. It's usually the same in my supervision, at least, that you send a draft and there are many, many issues with your draft, but I'm not going to start the first line saying, what on earth have you submitted to me? I'm going to pick some of because it's never really from the 15 pages that you sent to me that all 15 pages are not good. Maybe somewhere in page 4, there are beautiful things that you said. Maybe somewhere in page 7. And so I will draw on those, that you've done this and done that and that. However, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on this and that and that and that. All right. And that's why I would write that in an email, so that when you open the attachment and it's full of red, you don't just want to cry, but you would have read the email first, hopefully, before you open the attachment to see the detailed things. And it's another thing, we're running out of time. Another thing, Lefa, and to everybody, someone who is sometimes very critical but gives very in-depth feedback is actually good, because what that says is this person actually made the effort, they took the time, they're actually very interested in what you were saying, and they went word for word, paragraph by paragraph, to engage with your work. One thing that we want, because we spend a lot of time working on our papers, is that someone gives your work their time. So someone who's going to be that critical and gives a lot of feedback is someone who actually cares. They care about your work, they care about the discipline, they care about what you have to contribute, and they care about what goes out into the world. Of course, in that moment when you receive it, and it looks like they're just attacking you, it's not going to come across like that. You just want to cry, you just want to throw this paper away, right? And that's okay. I think at the end of the day, we are human after all. It hurts. It hurts to get something back that you've worked so hard on and you thought you were making sense, and somebody comes and they're just saying, what on earth are you saying, right? So look at it in both ways, right? That it is painful, but it's also, at the end, I've always found, I've received feedback also that I just wanted to cry, and doubting myself and questioning myself. But when you get that and it's too much for you, just put it away for a while. And after a week, a couple of days, revisit it, sit with it again, read it again. And sometimes you'll find that when you read it for the second or the third time, when you've let it sink in, you start realizing, oh my gosh, yeah, actually that makes sense. Or, some of the things, of course, you're like, no, I actually refuse. Sometimes it's someone who's a expert in the field and they want things to be done in a particular way. You're bringing it a different way and they're not really open to that. That's also sometimes not okay. And that's why, as an author, never allow yourself to lose your voice. You don't have to agree with everything that the reviewer says. But if you don't agree with what the reviewer says, have reasons to why you are disagreeing with the reviewer. Okay, you cannot just say, no, that person, what they're saying, no. Why? Have reasons why you are disagreeing with the reviewer. Okay. All right. And then just quickly, we've run out of time. Just the last one, Kojo. Assessors are people appointed to assess articles for promotion. Oh, okay. So this is not for publication. This is for promotion. Okay. Okay. No, I absolutely understand. I absolutely understand. Yeah. Yeah, that is a pity, unfortunately. I understand from experience as well that we would be sent 10 of your articles for us to have a look at and then to assess. It is quite strange that someone would have an issue with the structure, because what we assess is things that are already published, and it has to be, the idea is to look at the work and whether the work is of quality and you have contributed to the discipline and you have done sufficient work for you to be considered for promotion, and not for me to look at your article and to look at whether the structure and the literature is sitting where and is not sitting where. I find that very strange, Kojo. Because that is not my understanding of what assessing is, because we are assessing something that is already published. The papers that are sent to us to assess for your promotion are things that are already published. So it would be strange to be looking at that. I thought is to look at the depth and the core and the contribution of the work, or what we deem as the contribution, and whether you are therefore at a level where you can be considered for promotion. I'm very sorry about that. I think the same as what I've just said to Liv. Sometimes, unfortunately, we don't choose our reviewers, we don't choose our assessors as people who are being assessed or reviewed, and it's just to have to work with what's being put to us. In your case, it is unfortunate because it's got direct implications for your promotion. My hope would be that the committee would see that and would not use that as a measure to be able to determine whether you get promoted or not, even though there are rankings in terms of giving you ranks or points up to 10 or so for each one. So someone who would say that they would give you a lower point, obviously, and that affects you. My apologies for that. Unfortunately, yeah, that one is a tricky one. We're going to stop here for today. Thank you so much for the questions. I think your questions were very exciting and they made the space very lively. And I always enjoy engaging with you through your questions. And I look forward to the next session that we're going to have together. And until then, please enjoy your evening. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody. Okay, and we ran out of time. Can you believe it?
I didn't expect it to go